Here's a question for you. Do we live in an elite dictatorship? Well, that's what Allister Heath, who's the editor of the Sunday Telegraph, thinks. He says that if the authorities don't start listening to the general public on issues like cars, crime and wokery, then there will be an uprising even bigger than Brexit. And I'm inclined to agree with that. The majority view now on loads of things, we could add trans issues in there, for example, what kids should be taught at schools. The majority view does not appear to be what's being upheld by the people who we put in charge. And all too often as well, they'll stand on a manifesto of something, then something else will come up and they'll go, sorry, we couldn't do that, we're going to have to do this instead. And here we are, years down the line, with an unelected Prime Minister doing things that nobody really wants, and a leader of the opposition doing things that I'm convinced he wishes he didn't have to do unless some very loud woke people behind him were making him do them. But Toby Young joins me, who is the founder of the Free Speech Union. Toby, thank you very much. Do we live in some kind of dictatorship, do you think?
Well, I read Allister's piece today and I thought it was absolutely spot on, Patrick. He's right. Across a number of issues, whether it's the small boats crisis, whether it's debanking, you name it, climate change, net zero, across a whole range of issues, the liberal metropolitan elite charged with governing us are completely at odds with the majority of the British people. One of the supposed failings of democracy is that sometimes the majority can impose its will on the minority, and we have all sorts of mechanisms in place to prevent that from happening, to protect minorities from being bullied by the majority. But what we don't have in place, Patrick, and seemingly less and less, is a way to protect the majority from a belligerent, aggressive, elitist minority. Elections are supposed to be the great way in which the majority can protect themselves of having unpopular views imposed upon them by a liberal metropolitan elite. But the problem is that on so many of these issues, particularly climate change, but also migration, the parties all seem to have the same policy. It's a uniparty. So who do we turn to if we want to protect ourselves from this elite? It's not clear.
Now, I've got a theory on this, which is that when you have a load of money in the bank and everything is rosy in the garden and nothing really can affect you that easily, you can afford to have luxury views sometimes because you live in the ideal world that, frankly, most of us don't. But we are most of us. The public is most of us. The electorate is most of us. And so what matters to the electorate does not match up with the elite views of people. Unfortunately, those people are the ones who tend to rule over us.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Spot on. A sociology PhD student at Cambridge has come up with this concept of luxury beliefs, which is a really powerful concept. And the idea is that members of the elite, high status, well-off people, have these beliefs that they articulate, which are intended to advertise their virtue, but cost them absolutely nothing. So, for instance, you can be in favour of open borders, of unrestricted migration, and that costs you nothing because you probably live in an area with gated communities. You may appreciate the low cost of hiring domestic help. You like going to Starbucks and Pret-a-Manger, where most of the people helping you are immigrants on low wages. But if you're a working class person competing for those jobs, seeing your salaries getting lower and lower, seeing your communities changing very, very quickly, of course, you're not going to be in favour of open borders. And that's just one example of a luxury belief. But more and more often now, the people in the governing classes, the officials, the politicians who are running our lives, they embrace these causes intended to advertise their virtue and, incidentally, their superior status, but which costs them absolutely nothing.
Yeah, indeed. And when it comes to this issue of there'll be an uprising bigger than Brexit, what do you think that means?
Well, without an opportunity to cast our votes at the ballot box for a party that doesn't embrace the consensus liberal elite view on all these issues, it's not clear what form that would take. Is Allister saying that there'll be some kind of popular uprising, civil unrest, something like what we've seen in France over the summer? I can't see that happening in the United Kingdom, at least not yet. I think we're quite far from that. I think the likeliest scenario is that if Rishi Sunak loses the next general election, which is more likely than not at this stage, there'll be a fiercely contested Conservative leadership election. And in that election, there may emerge a candidate who does depart from the consensus on issues like the small boats, on issues like the cost of living, debanking, net zero. And that candidate may do very well and go on to beat Keir Starmer at the next election but one. We'll have to see.
Toby, thank you very much, as ever. Toby Young there, who is, of course, heading up the Free Speech Union.